Translate this, and my position is yours. Billionaire mocks Black Maid. Her reply leaves him shocked. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The 30th floor of the Finch Global headquarters was a realm of rarefied air and hushed ambition. It was a world engineered for power, from the silent, sweeping expanse of Italian marble underfoot to the floor-to-ceiling windows that presented the sprawling city below, not as a home to millions, but as a territory to be conquered. Here, conversations were conducted in low, measured tones, and the currency was not money, but influence. Moving through this silent, high-stakes ecosystem like a ghost was Imani. To the titans of industry, who strode these halls, their minds occupied by mergers and market shares. She was part of the architecture, a uniform that ensured the gleaming surfaces remained immaculate. Her official role was part of the elite cleaning staff, a position she performed with a quiet, meticulous dignity that rendered her almost invisible. They did not see the calluses on her hands, softened each night with cheap lotion. They did not see the calluses on her hands, softened each night with cheap lotion. Her life was a carefully constructed fortress of routine and necessity. Each meager paycheck a stone in the wall, holding back a flood of debt and responsibility left by her late father's illness. This job, with its anonymity and steady hours, was a sanctuary of sorts. A place where she could earn her living without having to explain the chasm between the person she was and the person the world saw. She had long ago made peace with this duality. Her mind was her own, a sovereign nation no one could conquer, filled with the music of dead languages and the echoes of her father's passionate teachings. While she polished the long obsidian boardroom table, her reflection, a fleeting shadow on its surface, the man who owned that table was battling a crisis. Alistair Finch, a man whose portrait should have been etched onto a Roman coin, was a tempest of controlled fury. A multi-billion-dollar energy deal, the culmination of 2 years of aggressive negotiation, was imploding. The deal hinged on a partnership with a reclusive community in the Andes, who controlled access to a vast, untapped lithium deposit. And communication, the bedrock of any deal, had completely and utterly failed. Alistair saw people as assets, or liabilities, and at this moment his entire team was a liability, their collective intelligence failing to solve a problem he considered rudimentary. Understanding what the other side was saying, the emergency meeting in the 30th floor boardroom felt less like a conference and more like an inquisition. Alistair Finch paced before the panoramic window, a caged lion surveying a kingdom that was slipping through his fingers. His top executives, a collection of the sharpest legal and financial minds in the country, sat around the obsidian table, their faces a mixture of fear and feigned composure. The source of their collective failure was projected onto a massive screen at the front of the room. It was a high-resolution scan of a handwritten letter, penned on what looked like handmade paper. The script was beautiful, elegant, and utterly indecipherable. It was not Spanish. It was not Quechua. The world's most advanced translation software had identified it as a rare, archaic dialect of Aymara, a language with roots stretching back millennia. But this particular script was infused with local glyphs and ceremonial phrasing that rendered it meaningless to outsiders. A $2 billion deal, Alistair seethed, his voice a low, dangerous growl, is being held hostage by a piece of paper. We have had linguists from 3 different universities look at this. All of them are stumped. All of them offer theories and interpretations. I do not pay for theory. He wheeled around to face his head counsel. What have you got, Marcus? Marcus, a man who typically radiated unshakable confidence, shifted in his $1,000 suit. Mr. Finch, the consensus is that it's largely symbolic. They are communicating their distrust of formal, Western-style contracts. They seem to be invoking a sacred bond, an oath to the mountain. We believe the appropriate response is to redraft our offer with more culturally sensitive language. Alistair slammed his hand on the table, the sound cracking through the tense silence, like a gunshot. Believe? You believe? I have a board of directors breathing down my neck and you're selling me beliefs and culturally sensitive language. I need to know what this says. I need to know their term. I need to know if they are in or if they are out. It was at this moment that Imani entered the room, silent as a whisper. Her task was to refresh the coffee service, a routine she had performed 100 times. She moved with practiced unobtrusiveness, her eyes cast down, her presence meant to be felt no more than a change in air current. But as she reached the service station at the side of the room, her eyes lifted, drawn by the strange, beautiful script on the screen. It was a script she knew as well as she knew her own name. Imani's gaze lingered on the screen for only a second, but in that second, her focus was absolute. It was not the stare of idle curiosity. It was the focused, analytical gaze of a scholar. She recognized the regional specificities of the calligraphy, the subtle way the third character in the first line was altered to signify a binding oath, a detail no academic without field experience would ever grasp. Alistair, his senses honed to detect any disruption in his environment, caught the flicker of her attention. His fury, searching for a target, a place to land, found one. He turned his full, wrathful attention on the most powerless person in the room. "And what are you looking at?" he sneered, his voice dripping with scorn. Every head in the room swiveled towards Imani. She froze, her hand hovering over a silver coffee carafe. The sudden, intense focus of 20 powerful men was a physical force, pinning her to the spot. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, her gaze dropping back to the floor. You were just what?" Alistair walked towards her, his presence a wave of cold intimidation. "Were you admiring the calligraphy? Perhaps you have an opinion. Perhaps our cleaning staff has a hidden expertise in 12th century Indian linguistics." A few of the executives let out sycophantic, uncomfortable chuckles. It was a classic Finch maneuver, dressing down a subordinate to amplify the pressure on his senior team. "Tell me," he continued, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across his face. He gestured grandly towards the screen. "You look like a smart woman. Why don't you give it a try? Amaze us all." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, humiliating whisper that was still loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Go on, translate this, and my position is yours. This big chair, this whole company, it's all yours." He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh that was devoid of all humor. He turned back to his team, a self-satisfied look on his face, leaving Imani standing there in a crucible of shame, the silence of the room a testament to her public humiliation. She was trapped, a butterfly pinned to a board. The air crackled with tension. She could either dissolve into apologies and flee the room, or she could do the unthinkable. The silence in the boardroom stretched, becoming a tangible entity. The hushed whir of the building's ventilation system seemed to roar in the stillness. Imani stood frozen for a beat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt the weight of their collective gaze, the sting of their casual cruelty. Humiliation washed over her, hot and familiar. She could feel the color rising in her cheeks. The expected response, the one her life had trained her for, was to shrink, to apologize, to become invisible again, to retreat, to the safety of her anonymity. But then, something shifted. As she looked from Alistair Finch's mocking face to the beautiful, familiar script on the screen, a different feeling began to surface, pushing through the shame. It was a quiet, cold anger, an indignation not for herself, but for the language they were dismissing, for the culture they were trampling with their arrogance, and for the memory of her father, who had taught her that every language was a sacred world, deserving of respect. She straightened her spine. It was a small movement, but in the context of the room, it was a tectonic shift. She lifted her chin and met Alistair Finch's gaze directly. Her own eyes, which he had never truly looked at before, were clear, steady, and held a depth he could not have imagined. "I would not want your position, sir," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. It was perfectly modulated, devoid of fear or anger. It seems to carry a great deal of stress and very little understanding. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. It was as if a statue had just spoken. Before Alistair could react, before he could unleash the fury that was surely building at her impertinence, she turned and walked, not out of the room, but towards the screen. She stood before the projected text, her posture relaxed, her focus absolute. The room, the powerful men, the weight of the moment, It all seemed to fall away. She was alone with the words. Then she began to speak. "This is not a letter of terms," Imani began. Her voice is calm and clear as a mountain stream. "It is a formal invitation and a warning. The script is a ceremonial form of Imara, yes, but the syntax and glyphs are specific to the Kulawaya people, the traditional healers and keepers of lore in that region. Software would never understand it. It's meant to be spoken, not just read." She pointed to the first cluster of characters. "This first section is not about the lithium. It is a greeting to the spirit of the mountain, which they call Apu. They are acknowledging that we are guests on their sacred land, and they are asking the Apu to judge our intention. They are in effect making the mountain itself a witness to this negotiation." Alistair stood frozen, the mocking retort he had been forming dying on his lips. Marcus, the head counsel, was leaning forward, his pen hovering over his notepad, his expression one of dawning astonishment. "The second part," Imani continued, her finger tracing a line in the air, "outlines their history. It speaks of the metal that cries tears of poison, which refers to the Spanish silver mines of the 16th century. It speaks of promises broken by men with paper smiles. This is not just a history lesson, sir. It is a precedent. They are telling you that they have a long memory, and that your contract is being weighed against centuries of betrayal." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle into the room. "And this final section is their offer. It is conditional. They will grant a stewardship, not an ownership, of the lithium. They ask for no money. Instead, they demand the funding and construction of three things: a modern hospital that incorporates their traditional herbal medicine, a school that will teach their children their own language and history, alongside a modern curriculum, and a sophisticated water reclamation system for the entire region, to be maintained in perpetuity by your company." She finally turned from the screen to face Alistair Finch. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes held a challenge. "It is not a business proposal, Mr. Finch. It is a blood oath. They are not asking what you are willing to pay. They are asking what you are willing to build. They are not testing your wallet. They are testing your soul." The silence that followed Imani's explanation was absolute, a vacuum, where the arrogant certainty of the room had once been. The 20 most powerful executives at Finch Global sat as if turned to stone, their faces a gallery of disbelief. Alistair Finch looked as though he had been struck by lightning. The color had drained from his face, leaving behind a pallor of pure, unadulterated shock. His entire worldview, a structure built on the simple metrics of profit and loss, had just been demolished by the woman who served him coffee. Imani, having delivered her analysis, simply gave a small, respectful nod. She turned and walked back to the service cart, picked up the coffee carafe, and resumed her duties as if she had just been commenting on the weather. The simple domestic act was so profoundly at odds with the intellectual tour de force she had just performed, that it shattered the spell. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My God, a hospital, a school. We've been framing this as a resource acquisition. They've been framing it as a sacred trust. We were about to send them an insulting counteroffer." David Chen, a young, bright-eyed analyst, who had always felt out of place in Alistair's aggressive corporate culture, was staring at Imani with something approaching reverence. He saw not a maid, but a key, a bridge to a world they had been too blind to see. But Alistair was not looking at his team. He was looking at Imani. His mind, a machine designed to calculate, to analyze, to dominate, was short-circuiting. The world, for a moment, had ceased to make sense. He was a man who believed in order, in hierarchies, in the clear, delineated roles people were meant to play. The woman in the maid's uniform was supposed to be a simple variable, an easily quantified part of his overhead. She was not supposed to hold the key to a multi-billion-dollar deal. She was not supposed to be more brilliant than his entire executive team combined. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a burning in his gut, but beneath it something else was stirring, a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of raw curiosity. He dismissed the meeting with a wave of his hand, his mind already elsewhere. "Get me everything you have on her," he commanded his head of security in a low voice. A few minutes later, gesturing with his chin towards Imani, who was now quietly clearing away the used coffee cup, her employment file, her background, where she went to school, what she ate for breakfast. I want to know who she is. The preliminary file from the cleaning service was, as Alistair expected, almost useless. Imani Nkrumah, age 32, address in a lower-income borough. A list of previous employers that painted a picture of a life spent in the margins. Cashier, library shelver, office cleaner. No college education listed, no hint of any special skills. It was a ghost resume, the life story of a person designed to be overlooked. For Alistair, it only deepened the mystery. The dissonance between the woman on paper and the woman in his boardroom was a puzzle he found himself obsessively trying to solve. He sat in his office, the city lights twinkling below like a conquered galaxy, but his mind was not on his empire. It was on her. His mockery replayed in his head, each word a fresh sting of shame. Translate this, and my position is yours. The sheer blind arrogance of it. He, a man who prided himself on his ability to assess value, had stood face to face with a diamond and seen only a piece of glass. He spent the next 24 hours in a state of restless agitation. The report from his security chief arrived in a sealed digital file the following afternoon. Alistair opened it, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. And as he read, the puzzle of Imani Nkrumah solved itself, and the truth of her life story left him utterly, profoundly humbled. She was the only child of Dr. Joseph Nkrumah, a celebrated but famously eccentric professor of ethno-linguistics at Oxford, a man who had eschewed the stuffy halls of academia for a life in the field. The report contained photos of a small, bright-eyed Imani in the Amazon basin, in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, in the very Andean villages her father was studying. She hadn't been raised in a house. She had been raised in the world, her classrooms the campfires of elders, her textbooks the oral histories of a dozen cultures. She was fluent in 7 languages before she was 10, and had a working knowledge of at least a dozen more obscure dialects. She was by all accounts a prodigy, her father's brilliant apprentice. She had been accepted to Oxford on a full scholarship to follow in his footsteps. But then tragedy struck. Dr. Nkrumah was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer. Imani dropped out of university to become his full-time caregiver. The experimental treatments, the hospital stays, it all bled their modest savings dry. The report included a list of pawned items, her father's prized collection of rare books, her mother's wedding ring, her own scholarship medal. After he passed, she was left with a mountain of medical debt, and the sole responsibility for her younger brother's care. So she did what she had to do. She buried her past, sheathed her brilliant mind, and took on the anonymous, unassuming work that would pay the bills and keep her family afloat. She had sacrificed her own bright future on the altar of love and duty. Alistair finished the report and sat back in his leather chair, the silence of his office pressing in on him. He felt hollowed out, his own life of privilege and accomplishment suddenly feeling cheap and unearned in the face of her quiet, profound sacrifice. He thought of the immense, untapped potential, the brilliant mind that had been relegated to wiping down tables and serving coffee. He thought of his own casual, cruel dismissal of her. The shame was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. He understood now that his mockery had not just been an insult to her, but an insult to the very idea of human potential, an act of sacrilege against a spirit he was not worthy to even witness. He had to make it right. But how? A bonus? A promotion? It all felt so insultingly inadequate. He summoned Imani to his office. When she entered, she was back in her uniform, her expression carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil of the previous day. She stood before his desk, waiting, the perfect image of a subordinate awaiting instruction. The sight of it, the stark, unjust reality of their respective positions, was more than he could bear. He stood up, walked around his massive desk, and stood before her. He did not ask her to sit. He wanted to meet her on her feet, as an equal. Imani, he began, his voice rasped. He had to clear his throat. I haven't no words to properly express the depth of my regret for my behavior yesterday. I'm sorry is a pathetic and insufficient phrase for what I did. I was arrogant, I was cruel, and I was blind. He paused, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I saw a uniform, and I failed to see the extraordinary person wearing it. For that, I am truly and profoundly ashamed." Imani listened, her expression unreadable. She did not offer him the comfort of a quick forgiveness. She simply waited, allowing him the dignity of his own reckoning. "I read about your father," he continued, his voice softer now. "I read about your life, and I understand that what the world has lost in your absence from academia is a tragedy. I can't fix that, but I will not stand by and allow your brilliance to be wasted polishing my furniture for one more day." He walked back to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. "I told you that if you translated that document, my position was yours. I was mocking you, but I am a man of my word, so I am offering you a position." He slid the paper across the desk. It was an offer of employment. The title read, Executive Vice President, Global Strategy and Cultural Integration. The salary listed was a number with 7 figures. "You will not answer to anyone but me," he said. "You will build a new division from the ground up. You will be our bridge to the world we have been too arrogant to understand. You will be our conscience. You will make us better." He looked at her, his face stripped of all its usual arrogance, his expression open and vulnerable. "Please, Imani, give me a chance to be the man you deserved to meet yesterday." Imani looked down at the offer, at the staggering salary, at the title that promised a world of power and influence. It was everything she had been forced to give up, handed back to her on a silver platter. The temptation to simply accept, to take the victory, was immense. But she was her father's daughter. She knew that true power wasn't in a title or a salary. It was in the purpose you served. She looked up from the paper, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Thank you, Miss Finch," she said, her voice calm and steady. "It's a generous offer, but I cannot accept it." Alistair's face fell. He looked utterly crestfallen, as if she had just slapped him. "I see," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I understand. After my behavior, you misunderstand me," she interrupted gently. "I am not refusing because of what you did. I am refusing because of what this job is." She tapped the paper. "This is a position built for your world, Mr. Finch. A world of titles and hierarchies and executive vice president. I don't want to be a part of that world. I want to help you build a new one." He stared at her, confused. "My terms are different," she continued. "I will lead this new division, but it will not be called Global Strategy. It will be the Finch Nkrumah Foundation for Cultural Exchange. It will be a non-profit entity, funded by this company, but operating independently of its corporate structure. Its mission will not be to facilitate deals, but to foster understanding. We will build schools, not just negotiate with communities. We will create scholarships for students like I was. We will honor the wisdom of the cultures you wish to work with, not just exploit their resources." She took a breath. "And my salary will not be this number," she said, pointing to the paper. "I will take a salary equivalent to a senior university professor. The rest," she looked him straight in the eye, "the rest will be the seed money for the foundation's first project, the hospital, the school, and the water reclamation system for the Kalawaya people. We will fulfill our side of the oath before we extract a single piece of lithium." It was an audacious counteroffer. It was not a negotiation. It was a moral manifesto. She was not asking for a job. She was demanding a revolution. Alistair Finch, the master negotiator, the man who had never lost a deal, was completely and utterly outmaneuvered. He was left with a choice: cling to the old world of profit at any cost, or embrace the new one she was offering. He looked at this incredible woman, at her quiet strength, her unshakable integrity, and he started to laugh. It was not the mocking, cruel laugh from the boardroom. It was a laugh of genuine, unadulterated awe. "You are," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "the most brilliant, terrifying woman I have ever met." He extended his hand across the desk. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Nkrumah." The creation of the Finch Nkrumah Foundation sent ripples through the corporate world. It was an unheard of move, a radical restructuring that baffled market analysts and thrilled social progressives. Alistair Finch, the ruthless capitalist, was suddenly a champion of cultural exchange. But for those inside the company, the change was even more profound. Imani Nkrumah was not just a new executive, she was a new center of gravity. She moved through the 30th floor with the same quiet dignity she'd had as a cleaner. But now, people saw her. They saw her brilliance, her compassion, and her unyielding commitment to her principles. The first order of business was the Indian deal. Imani led the delegation herself. She did not arrive with a team of lawyers, but with engineers, doctors, and educators. She spoke to the elders, not in a boardroom, but around a fire, under the watchful gaze of the Apu. She did not present a contract, she presented a partnership, a shared vision for the future of their community. The deal was signed, not with a pen, but with a shared meal and a solemn vow. It was a triumph not of negotiation, but of respect. Back at headquarters, her influence began to permeate the company's sterile culture. The foundation became a magnet for a new kind of talent, bright, passionate young people like David Chen, who were drawn to her vision. The boardroom, once a place of fear and intimidation, became a place of vibrant, challenging debate. Alistair, for his part, underwent a quiet, profound transformation. He began to listen. He delegated more. He found a new kind of satisfaction, not in the rising numbers of a stock ticker, but in the progress reports from the school being built in the Andes. One afternoon, he found Imani staring out the window of her new office, which overlooked the same city as his, but seemed to have a different view. "I never knew," he said, standing beside her, "that you could create value by giving it away." Imani smiled. "My father used to say that wisdom, like love, is the only thing that grows when you share it." He nodded, a comfortable silence settling between them. They were no longer boss and employee. They were partners, two unlikely allies who had found in each other a path to a better world. Their journey was a testament to a simple, powerful truth, that the greatest asset a company or a person can have is a conscience, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to see the true worth of the person standing in front of you, and to have the courage to build a world where that worth can finally be honored.